Hello, welcome to Module 6 Reading Overview video. Here I'm going to talk about the 3 chapters we have to read this week and some of the details that you'll be reading about. Okay, so chapter 13 is the first chapter we'll be reading this week. This is titled Writing, A History of Access to Information. This is pages 298 to 323. We looked last week at surplus production made into products of consumption that wouldn't last or were destined for becoming waste or sacrificed even. Looked at the consumption of wealth and resources through sacrifice, specifically the removal of wealth through burial and the ultimate sacrifice of human sacrifice. This week, we're going to be looking at a technology of power and one that was used to demonstrate the power to control surplus production and to help organize human societies into different regimes of exploitation and extraction. This, of course, is the technology of written language. We will explore a diversity of writing systems and we'll follow a thread of different ways to construct writing systems and common ways that written language has been utilized to control information, a way that would control power over people and have power consolidated by particular people or groups of people in ruling classes. This will help us in our workbook activity this week, especially alongside the videos and the exercise. So this may take some more time to complete the exercises because of all of the content that goes along with it. But again, Chapter 13 will help us. And it will also help us frame again the idea that technology is an interface between humans and their environment. And here we will think about how writing is an extension of this framework. We'll think about the diverse writing systems and how they helped human societies shape the environments around them, how it controls the flow of information through society, how it helps control the authorization of power that can enhance certain people's ability to gain and maintain social control over people, as well as controlling resources used by humans and extracted by human labor, including the conspicuous consumption of resources. In the past, humans have used writing as a source of information, and it helps to transfer ideas over and across large geographical spaces and time frames. So we can think about how writing opens up new flows of information, power, and resource exchange in particular ways that are guided by societal structures and cultural characteristics, which is probably the easiest way to think about how writing in the past was used in ways that writing today is also used for, but perhaps has different platforms or mediums to do that through, such as social media and online literature databases. Chapter 14 is titled Extracting the Modern World. This is pages 324 to 347. We will be looking at the extraction of resources, which plays well off of the use of writing in ancient times or in prehistoric times, because writing was also utilized to help with the extraction of resources from the earth and to control the labor that was needed to be consolidated and directed in a strategy of extraction. So here we'll be looking at the extraction of resources outside of using writing to direct that. And we'll be looking at the toll it takes on the environment, as well as the toll it takes on local communities to maintain extraction levels from different periods of time, different cultural context, and different localities. So we will be reading about the concept of extractivism, which is the process of resource extraction from the earth and from lands that are not your ancestral homelands, and done so in order to be sold in foreign markets. Our interest in the Anthropocene focuses on the intersection of humans and the environment with the use of technologies. And in this chapter, we will read about the use of tools and technologies to strip resources and relocate them to different places where the material would undergo a production process for other technologies. And we will see how that extraction in the past has led to the destruction of different environments in human societies, especially during the classic colonial periods of history that started a grand but rather egregious era of extractivism, unlike what the world had ever seen before. and we will try to consider how this might compare with present-day global economics and commerce. We will also be reading about the emergence of markets that occurred through the specialization of technology production and the sale of surplus and specialty items. And this will eventually influence some of the first monetized markets or market economies in the world throughout different places in Asia and Europe, such as those in classical Greece around 2,500 years before present, and the centuries to follow that in that area. This is an interesting progression because we will see how city-states political organization eventually utilized monetized systems to garner the public support they needed to maintain the growth and transition into market economies. So by instituting and institutionalizing a monetized system where buying within a market becomes a literal way of politically supporting ruling classes, we will see some of the initial shaping of extractivism based around the idea of market expansion for the purpose of expanding political control and maintaining that political control. By taking a look at fishing and the growth of maritime extractivism, we will get a chance to consider what the differences are between traditional hunting subsistence practices or subsistence practices in general, and the exploitation of resources that occurs in extractivism, particularly how one of these produces a niche environment for other organisms to live and thrive in. This is the subsistence practices that we're talking about, while the other is a one-way unilateral removal of food resources that don't often have a restorative element to it. Although we do know that this isn't always the case, especially for some indigenous salmon fishing practices or trout fishing practices that work to increase the offspring of these populations at the same time as extracting them for food. One of the restorative practices, a couple of them that we will read about, will be the clam gardens of Quadra Island in Western Canada, where extractive environments were designed to simultaneously foster the growth of mollusk and fish populations in a more niche form of their natural environment. We will take a look at how underwater archaeologists utilize and study different maritime practices from the archaeological past, sometimes with the use of cofferdams that allow for the ability to excavate features that would normally have been completely submerged. And another example of extractivism that we will read about this week is from the silver mines of Potosi in Bolivia during the Spanish colonial period in modern-day Bolivia. Over the process of mining tens of thousands of tons of silver, there was a steady and detrimental impact on both the environment and people who were enslaved for extractivism purposes. Silver was extracted and eventually shipped to Spanish colonies all over the world during that period with the use of the Spanish galleon trading network. And this is a process where there was an immense amount of polluting of the local waterways in Bolivia from the waste of smelting heavy metal. Byproducts were like lead were filtered into these waterways, which had a huge impact on the health of local communities as well as the surrounding ecology. And this is a process that is akin to the extractivism that is maintained throughout the Industrial Revolution and into the modern world, and something that continues today. This is something that a lot of governmental organization in the modern day has tried to organize to address. And the populations that are most heavily impacted by this extractivism are the same as they were in the historical time periods, that of local people and indigenous populations that rely on the local ecology to live. And we can think of a number of examples around the world, whether they are the silver mines in Indonesia that have persisted today, or neighborhoods that lay adjacent to metal and plastic or rubber refineries in places like Ohio. The offshore oil drillings in the Gulf of Mexico, or crude oil pipelines like the Dakota Access Pipeline and Line 3 and Line 5 in the United States that run through Native American reservations in the Dakotas, in Minnesota, in Wisconsin. Or we can think of the Coastal GasLink pipeline that's currently being constructed in the Canadian province of British Columbia and right through the heart of treaty territories that belong to the Wet'suwet'en people. This is a native and an indigenous group of people in British Columbia. And although governments may not be enslaving people to assure that extractivism is maintained still, there are ways that economic dynamics and monetary incentives are still leveraged in similar ways to motivate resource extraction and wealth from the earth, as well as the wealth that other populations share a cultural affinity with. But before we can consider that legacy and how it remains today, we will consider just how impactful slave labor had been, not just to the construction of concepts like race and racism, but specifically to the generation of extreme wealth and luxury for higher and ruling European classes and their descendants, and how archaeology has been able to concentrate their studies in recent decades on the material remains of this process. And then lastly, chapter 15, this is titled The Future of the Anthropocene. This is the culmination of everything that we've been reading about over the last 5 or 6 weeks. The final chapter of the textbook is where we'll take a look finally into the future and use the perspectives of our past to shape our understanding of what the challenges are that lay ahead. We will see how archaeology has showcased human societies to have a great sense of resilience and variability in response to challenges and changes. So today will need to consider these in the framework of the Anthropocene, a period where the diversity of life on Earth is decreasing and where humans have experienced an intensely rapid rise in species population growth and global consumption levels. This will be addressed in this chapter a few different ways, but one of the first ways is by reading about rewilding our biological diversity and the restoration of ecological systems. A couple examples being that of the Elwha River in Washington and the River Wandle in England, where restoration projects were implemented to help revitalize salmon and trout populations following the removal of the Elwha Dam and the cleanup of the heavily polluted waters of the River Wandle, showcasing how the dismantling of modern industrial projects can provide an avenue for natural environmental reconstruction and local population restoration. So in addition, we will see how technologies of non-renewable energy use that drove the Industrial Revolution can be met with alternatives to that energy consumption that has caused detrimental effects to the environments. These technologies, such as LEDs and solar power, can help in this transition, but will likely need to be considered more than just technological innovation, but rather we'll need to look at these simultaneously with the dynamics of extractivism that we have read about in the previous chapter, and the system of resource exploitation that may still persist even with the use of these new technologies, creating a sort of double-edged sword for technological advancement that much of the evidence of past extractivism helps us understand is also a part of the problem that we need to address, that technological advancements are not the sole answer, but rather that needs to be considered alongside extractive practices. And lastly, we will consider how individual agency can play a role in the challenges that are to come. And we will consider the impact that we can have by making choices to innovate ways that help the environment and human beings, where natural habitats are restored through changed habits, where degrowth and the transformation of different consumption practices has an impact on the waste that humans create in the wake of progress, and where we can consider how to integrate practices that were developed by past populations and had an effect of creating more mutualistic dynamics among humans and their environments, as well as between human populations. So let's think about some of the ideas that we can come up with as individuals to work with other people, work with other populations in their local context in order to create a more mutualistic dynamic, one that does not create as much consumptive waste as we create today and have in the past, and those that create avenues for innovation. Okay, that's all I have for you this week on our reading overview. This is our last reading overview. So enjoy the finale of the book. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out. Thanks. Enjoy.